Forget everything you think you know about medieval combat. Hollywood wants you to believe knights politely tap swords, and the battlefield is just a dramatic dance of chivalry. The truth? The Middle Ages were a nightmare factory of weapons designed for maximum brutality. Imagine battles not as clean duels, but as savage chaos where bones break, armor crumples, and weird, monstrous weapons reign supreme. Today we're diving headfirst into the most insane, over-the-top and downright terrifying weapons of medieval warfare. The tools of destruction that history textbooks barely mention and movies are too afraid to show you. From spiked morning stars and bone-crushing warhammers to flails that could leave you fighting yourself, and polearms sharp enough to hack off limbs in a single blow, we're tearing apart the myth of noble medieval weaponry. Ever wondered why some weapons were banned from the field, or what it was really like to stare down a knight wielding a weapon forged purely for carnage? Stay tuned as we rip the armor off medieval combat and expose the metallic monsters behind the legends. Stick around and let us know, which of these crazy weapons would you least want coming at you across a muddy, blood-soaked field? This is medieval crazy history. Turn up the volume and prepare for mayhem. In the grim realities of medieval battlefields, the flail stands out as one of the most chaotic and unpredictable weapons ever wielded. Though often dramatized in popular media as a monstrously spiked ball whirling on a chain, the medieval flail actually has roots deeply embedded in humble agricultural origins. Before it became a weapon of war, the flail was an essential farming tool used to thresh grain, repeatedly beating stalks to separate the edible seeds. This practical background would influence both its design and the way it was adapted for violence. Medieval peasants, often conscripted into armies or rising up in popular revolts, took what was at hand, turning the familiar farming implement into a fearsome weapon. The flail typically consisted of a long wooden handle connected by a flexible chain or leather strap to a heavy striking head, sometimes spiked or studded with metal. This connection allowed the head to swing freely, gaining extraordinary speed and force through centrifugal energy when swung. The impact of a swinging flail was devastating. The flexible chain enabled it to bypass traditional defenses, such as shields or the edges of armor plates, striking around and over obstacles. Despite its deadly potential, the flail was notoriously difficult to master. Battlefield accounts and martial manuals from the period highlight how easily this weapon could strike its wielder by accident. The risk of self-injury led many warriors to approach the flail with a mix of respect and fear. Combat styles often involved carefully controlled swings and a high degree of spatial awareness, but adrenaline and chaos could easily turn the weapon's flexible strike against its own user. Images of a warrior contorting to avoid his own weapon are more than just comic. They represent real dangers on medieval battlefields. During the later Middle Ages, the flail began to evolve beyond the simple two-piece implement, acquiring enhanced lethality in the form of spiked, ball-shaped heads. These variants, sometimes called chain morning stars, combined the swinging flexibility of the flail with the puncturing power of metal spikes or studs covering the striking surface. The result was a weapon capable not only of crushing bones, but also tearing through mail and flesh, causing horrific wounds that could incapacitate or kill with a single blow. Yet despite its fearsome reputation, surviving finds and artwork suggest that the flail, especially the spiked chain version, was nowhere near as common among well-equipped knights as folklore and 19th century romantic art portray it. Rather, it was a weapon emblematic of the lower classes, remnants of farming tools transformed into savage implements in desperate hands. During uprisings like the German Peasants' War and the Hussite Wars, flails were common weapons among levied foot soldiers who lacked access to traditionally prestigious armaments like swords and lances. Additionally, several German and Iberian martial arts manuals from the 15th to 17th centuries, such as the Fechtbücher, include instructions on flail techniques, revealing a mix of practical combat advice and defensive maneuvers against such an unwieldy weapon. These treatises attest to the flail's place not only on the battlefield, but also among the codified martial practices of the time, blurring the lines between improvised weapon and accepted tool of war. Ultimately, the flail embodies the brutal ingenuity and chaotic violence of medieval combat. Its design transcended its humble agricultural origins to become a feared instrument of destruction, capable of shattering the ironclad defenses of knights and spreading terror on the field. But it was also a weapon of risk and hardship, too wild and dangerous for many. mastered only by those willing to embrace its destructive power while dancing on the edge of self-harm. From the muddy fields of peasant revolts to the desperate hand-to-hand clashes on Gothic battlegrounds, the flail has secured a legendary place in the history of medieval weaponry, both as a symbol of raw, messy warfare and a reminder that the most fearsome weapons often come from the humblest beginnings. As medieval armor evolved to become more protective and resistant to traditional weapons like swords and axes, warriors and weapon makers needed a new solution. Enter the warhammer, a weapon designed with one brutal purpose in mind: to inflict decisive damage on heavily armored enemies. The warhammer quickly became known as the nightmare of knights clad in plate armor. The warhammer is a deceptively simple weapon, a sturdy wooden or metal shaft topped with a heavy, often metal head. The head was usually two-sided, featuring a flat striking surface on one side and a pointed spike on the other. This dual design made the warhammer both a powerful bludgeoning tool and a piercing weapon capable of exploiting weaknesses in armor seams or vulnerable spots like joints and visors. Combatants used the flat face to deliver crushing blows aimed to stun, disorient, or fracture bones, bypassing the protective qualities of hardened steel armor. Once an opponent was knocked off balance or to the ground, the spike end provided the deadly finish, capable of punching through helmets or penetrating gaps in armor to cause lethal injuries. Longer-handled warhammers, sometimes reaching up to 6 feet, were favored by foot soldiers who needed reach to fight mounted knights or break through thick shields. In contrast, shorter handheld versions were popular among cavalrymen who required maneuverable but effective weapons in close quarters. The development of the warhammer was a direct response to the rise of plate armor during the 14th and 15th centuries. As swords began to bounce off curved surfaces and axes struggled to find purchase, the blunt force trauma caused by warhammers proved devastating. They transferred immense kinetic energy on impact, causing concussions and internal damage even without penetrating the armor. Historical treatises from the period, such as German fencing manuals, include detailed techniques for wielding warhammers in both offensive strikes and defensive grappling maneuvers. Skilled warriors could use the spike to hook an opponent's shield, weapon, or even horse reins, giving them control in the chaos of battle. Several variations of the warhammer emerged over time, including the Lucerne hammer, which featured a multi-pronged head combining hammer, spike, and pick functions, and the bec de Corbin, crow's beak, specifically designed for piercing and tearing armor. Some warhammers also became symbols of rank and prestige, especially among European cavalry officers. Despite its brutal reputation, the warhammer required skill and strength to use effectively. A wild or heavy swing could leave the wielder off balance or vulnerable to counterattacks. Mastery of timing, distance, and precision were critical, especially given the unpredictable nature of armored combat. The warhammer's effectiveness extended beyond just battlefield use. They were common in judicial duels, tournaments, and even ceremonial contexts well into the Renaissance, showcasing their lasting importance in European martial culture. In sum, the warhammer stands as a testament to medieval ingenuity in warfare, a weapon born out of necessity that transformed the art of combat by leveling the playing field against seemingly invincible knights. Its brutal force and tactical versatility made it a weapon feared and respected by all who faced it. The Morning Star, with its spiked ball fastened to a wooden or metal handle, conjures images of medieval brutality that few weapons can match. Known for its terrifying combination of heavy impact and piercing spikes, the Morning Star was a favored weapon for nearly a century among foot soldiers and knights alike. Unlike the flail, which swings freely on a chain, the Morning Star is a fixed weapon, typically a solid wooden shaft with a metal-studded or spiked ball attached permanently to the end. This design made it simpler to control than a flail, but didn't make it any less deadly. Its primary advantage was its ability to combine blunt force trauma with puncturing power. On impact, the heavy ball delivered crushing blows capable of breaking bones and denting armor, while the numerous metal spikes acted like tiny spears, ripping flesh and penetrating chainmail or plate armor gaps. Historical records describe the Morning Star as a democratizing weapon, bridging the gap between heavily armored knights and poorly equipped foot soldiers. Its brutal efficiency allowed less trained combatants to deal devastating damage with basic swings and thrusts, It required less skill to wield effectively compared to some other polearms or swords, but demanded significant strength and stamina. During battles, the Morning Star was especially effective at close quarters or in dense formations, where the wielder could exploit small openings. Spiked balls tearing into armor edges or helmets caused casualties that were difficult to defend against. The element of surprise and sheer shock value often left opponents reeling or retreating in fear. Tactically, some Morning Stars had longer shafts and were wielded almost like polearms, shifting their role between heavy handgun and spear. Others were shorter and more maneuverable for quick, lethal strikes in personal combat. Variations abounded across Europe from the 14th to the 16th century, each optimized for different fighting styles and battlefield conditions. The weapon's fearsome reputation was boosted by its frequent representation in art and literature as a tool of terrible vengeance or righteous punishment. Yet, the Morning Star also found practical application in tournaments and judicial duels, where its balance of power and control made it a weapon of choice in testing warrior skill. That said, wielding a Morning Star was no walk in the park. The heavy ball and spikes could easily catch on clothing or armor if not handled carefully, and improper swings risked injury to the wielder. The weapon's force meant that even a single miss could cause a fumbling, leaving the user exposed to counterattacks. Some historic battles underscore the Morning Star's brutal effectiveness. Knights and foot soldiers alike recount moments where a well-placed swing from this weapon turned the tide by incapacitating heavily armored foes that would otherwise have been nearly invulnerable. Chroniclers tell of opponents retreating at the sight or sound of the spiked ball crashing down. The Morning Star's legacy shed light on the brutal reality of medieval warfare, a reality where survival depended not on elegance, but on leveraging punishing tools that could cripple foes quickly, brutally, and mercilessly. In the vast arsenal of medieval warfare, polearms hold a special place for their sheer versatility, reach, and brutal effectiveness. Among these, the glaive and halberd stand out as surreal, multifaceted weapons designed to deliver powerful slashing, stabbing, and hooking strikes. They were the Swiss army knives of the medieval battlefield, intimidating, complex, and unforgiving. Polearms typically consist of a long shaft, often 6 to 8 feet long, with a heavy, sharpened blade or spike at the end, sometimes combined with secondary hooks, spikes, or hammer-like surfaces. This combination made them extremely effective in various combat situations, whether slicing through enemy lines, penetrating armor, or unseating mounted knights. The design complexity allowed soldiers to adapt to different threats with a single weapon. The glaive, resembling a large curved sword mounted on a pole, was excellent for sweeping cuts and disarming foes. With its curved blade, it could deliver massive cuts capable of severing limbs or slicing through unarmored parts of the body. Less common than swords or axes, but far more intimidating due to its reach and weight, the glaive demanded skillful wielding to harness its full potential. The halberd, perhaps the most famous among polearms, blends an axe blade, a spear point, and a hook or thorn on the back. This triple threat weapon was designed for multiple applications, cleaving through armor with the axe, thrusting like a spear, and snagging riders or opponents with the hook. Infantry equipped with halberds could counter armored cavalry and break shield walls, turning tightly packed formations into chaotic death traps. The versatility of polearms came with an edge, sometimes literally, of danger to their users. Handling such long, heavy weapons in the chaos of battle required training and discipline. Swinging a halberd without hitting a comrade, maintaining balance, and timing attacks required as much focus as strength. Many polearm users were professional infantry, trained extensively in formations. Dances of death practiced to maximize impact and minimize risk. Polearms were also prone to accidents. Stories and records tell of soldiers accidentally hooking their own feet or comrades while attempting sweeping strikes or tight maneuvers. The complex designs, while deadly in skilled hands, were unforgiving in clumsy ones. However, when wielded correctly, polearms could decimate large groups with devastating cuts and piercing thrusts. Historical accounts emphasize their effectiveness against cavalry. The hook on the halberd could pull riders from horses, an ideal countermeasure against mounted knights who otherwise dominated the battlefield. The reach allowed infantry to threaten horses and riders alike before they could close in for close combat strikes. This strategic effectiveness made polearms a staple in the infantry arsenals of many European armies. Throughout battles like the Battle of Morgarten and the Swiss Wars of Independence, Polearm armed infantry played pivotal roles in repelling better-armed cavalry or halting enemy advances. Their ability to combine cutting, stabbing, and hooking into a single weapon suited the unpredictable nature of medieval engagements. Despite their battlefield success, these awe-inspiring weapons were often underestimated or misrepresented in popular culture. Many believe medieval combat was dominated by flashy sword fights, but the real battlefield was more often ruled by polearms, pike formations, and strategic use of reach and weight. Overall, polearms symbolize the intersection of medieval innovation and practicality, using clever combinations of blade and reach to pierce through the chaos of battle and strike terror into opponents. The glaive, halberd, and similar weapons were masterclasses in deadly design, turning foot soldiers into near-invincible forces capable of standing toe-to-toe with armored knights and horses. In the wild and inventive world of medieval warfare, not all weapons fall neatly into categories like sword or bow. Between the ranks of knights, foot soldiers, and archers, there was a lively menagerie of crazy weapons that combined brutal functionality with a flair for the bizarre. Weapons like the fauchard, monstrous axes, and bizarre lances paint a picture of a time when creativity and carnage knew no bounds. Take the fauchard, for instance. Imagine a huge razor-sharp blade curving out from a long pole, able to slice through flesh and armor alike. The fauchard looks like a farming scythe on steroids, and that's no coincidence. Like the flail, it was inspired by agricultural tools, but twisted into a weapon perfectly suited for chopping down foes en masse. Its curve allowed sweeping slashes mimicking the slicing of crops, but with far deadlier intent. Then there's the array of axes, everything from short, brutal hand axes to towering bearded axes with massive blades that could cleave shields and helmets in a single chop. Some axes had handles over 5 feet long, turning their wielder into a whirlwind of death capable of hacking through multiple enemies. Axes were favorites of the Vikings, but saw frequent use throughout medieval Europe by fighters who loved the raw, straightforward power behind a heavy swing. Lances and spears, though often simple at first glance, also came in wild varieties, designed to penetrate armor or trip horsemen. Some lances had ridiculously long spikes or multi-pronged tips, making them effective for stabbing through plate and chainmail layers. Variants like the boar spear had crossbars near the tip to stop wounded animals or horses from charging forward, essentially medieval safety features for the warrior. Many of these weapons were not only tools of destruction, but statements of terror. Their sheer size and unexpected shapes served to intimidate foes even before the first blow was struck. Imagine facing an enemy wielding a 100-pound axe or a scythe-like fauchard spinning blows inside a tight formation. The psychological impact alone was enough to start breaking morale. Medieval armies were far from uniform in their armaments, and many fighting men had their own personal twist on traditional weapons, often cobbled together from farms or the blacksmith's forge. This led to countless bizarre hybrids and one-offs, weapons so strange they sometimes baffle historians today. Beyond battle, some of these inventive weapons made appearances in tournaments where spectacle met combat skill. Knights brandishing wild weapons like the bardish or the glaive-to-axe hybrids added drama to contests, giving audiences a show while testing their mettle. However, not all were winners in the madness department. Many such inventive weapons were clunky, poorly balanced, or simply impractical, leading to accidents or early retirement from service. But that didn't stop medieval warriors from trying to outdo each other with bigger hits, sharper points, and more bizarre blade shapes. The sheer variety of these weapons reminds us that medieval warfare was as much about innovation and adaptation as it was about tradition and honor. For every sword-swinging knight, there was an axe-wielding berserker or a polearm-thrashing pikeman whose weapon might look like that of a mad scientist at a blacksmith shop. So the next time you think medieval combat was all swordplay and chivalrous parries, remember the fauchards slicing fiercely, the monstrous axes cleaving fate, and the crazy lances that turned knights and horses alike into bloody history. Throughout medieval history, some weapons crossed a line, so brutal and feared that they were banned or stigmatized as dishonorable. These forbidden weapons tell us as much about medieval culture as they do about warfare, revealing a complex relationship between martial necessity and social codes, where the terror of the battlefield met notions of humanity and honor. Many medieval armies and authorities placed restrictions on certain weapons, particularly those deemed excessively cruel or deceitful. Flails and certain types of spikes were often viewed with suspicion, Their unpredictability and viciousness made them feared on the battlefield, but also unpopular among the elite knights and commanders who prized chivalrous combat. War hammers and morning stars, capable of delivering devastating injuries, sometimes fell into this category as well. In some cases, religious orders or rulers issued edicts banning grotesque weapons during tournaments or battles, aiming to curb the bloodshed or maintain a veneer of honorable warfare. This tension between brutal efficiency and so-called noble combat highlights the medieval balance between violence and virtue, a balance that was constantly negotiated and often broken. Beyond official bans, the psychological terror some weapons provoked played a huge role in medieval warfare. A weapon's reputation could spread faster than its physical use. The mere sight or sound of a certain weapon was enough to affect the morale of opposing troops. Flails swinging on chains, the thunderous impacts of warhammers, or the glint of spikes on morning stars stirred fear and panic, softening enemy ranks before steel was even drawn. This psychological impact was often as important as physical destruction. Medieval commanders understood that breaking enemy morale could win battles even before the first blood was spilled. Weapons that inspired dread essentially became psychological weapons, turning fear into tactical advantage. Legends and myths frequently amplified these fears. Tales of cursed blades, weapons that never missed, or tools of unholy destruction fueled the aura around these forbidden arms. Some weapons even gained supernatural reputations, with stories of warriors wielding them possessing almost otherworldly strength or rage. However, not all claims were true. Archaeologists have unearthed strange and unique weapons, whose real purpose is still debated, while historical records sometimes exaggerate the effectiveness or cruelty of certain arms for propaganda. Separating fact, fear, and folklore is a challenge, but reveals the fascinating interplay between reality and perception in medieval warfare. In the end, the story of forbidden weapons is a story of humanity's struggle to find limits amid chaos. It tells us how medieval society tried to set lines in sand for warfare, lines that were often crossed or ignored when survival was at stake. Medieval warfare was brutal, chaotic, and anything but glamorous. Behind every legend of honorable sword fights lies a darker story, one of insane weapons designed for maximum destruction and terror. From the chaotic swings of the flail to the bone-crushing strikes of the warhammer and the sinister spikes of the morning star, these weapons were not just tools, they were instruments of fear and survival in a merciless world. We've ripped the veil off the myths and brought you the raw, unfiltered truth about some of the most insane weapons of the Middle Ages. These brutal arms shaped history, determined the fate of kingdoms, and left their mark on the scars and stories of countless warriors. So now, it's your turn. Which of these monstrous weapons would you least want aimed at you on a muddy battlefield? Or maybe you're daring enough to pick a favorite. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this dive into medieval madness. Subscribe for more twisted history tales, and share this video with friends who love history mixed with a little chaos. Until next time, stay curious and stay brutal.